I'm happy to announce on this First Communion weekend that there's actually a very special thing coming up here at St. John's on the week of May 20th through the 22nd, that Friday, Saturday, Sunday, is we're going to have a special display, a special exhibit come here. It's called the Vatican International Exhibit of the Eucharistic Miracles Around the World. And so it's a display, and it will be in the gathering place of different miracles that have happened throughout the world with the Eucharist. Some amazing stories. I had the opportunity to see this exhibit about 4 years ago briefly, so I'm excited to bring it here to St. John's through the work of some of our parishioners. And I'm really excited because I think it's going to help our belief in the Eucharist, that truly Jesus is present in the body and blood of Christ. Of course, if you ask our first communicants right now, they know that answer. I've asked them many times. I said, is it just a piece of bread and a cup of wine? And they go, no. I go, what is it? And they say, the body and blood of Christ. It's Jesus. They believe that it truly is Jesus in the Eucharist. However, a national survey of Catholics a couple years ago revealed that only 30% of Catholics believe that Jesus truly is present in the Eucharist. Only 30% believe in the real presence. So it's our hope that this display coming up in a couple weeks will help us with that. And because of this, I want to preach on the Eucharist, of course, today on First Holy Communion, but next weekend as well. The weekend after that, I'm going to bring in a special priest, Father Nate Myers from Buffalo, Minnesota, not New York, unfortunately, but Buffalo, Minnesota, who's going to come and preach. And eventually, we're going to have Father Andy McAlpin come and preach on the real presence of the Eucharist on Corpus Christi as well. So it'll be about 5 straight weeks preaching on the Eucharist. And what a great weekend to kick it off, but First Communion weekend. Of course, we can look at our gospel today from John chapter 14. And John chapter 14, by the way, is a big discourse on the Trinity. It's a beautiful discourse on the Trinity. But Jesus also says something striking in John 14, verse 27. He says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give it to you. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." And how does Jesus give us this peace? Well, I think most especially in the Eucharist, knowing that he is present there and that we are able to receive him. I don't know about you, but whenever I receive the Eucharist, I always feel this special peace come upon me. I don't understand it all. We know that the Eucharist, in a certain sense, just like the Trinity, is a mystery. St. John Vianney, my favorite saint, stated that if we truly knew what the Eucharist is, who the Eucharist is, if we comprehended it all, and we received Jesus in the Eucharist and understood it, our heart would explode with love. That's how deep the Eucharist is. That's how amazing it is. But as Jesus says, not as the world gives do I give it to you. We know that God's ways are not our ways. And so it's hard to understand. It's hard to comprehend. But we know from personal experience when we come to Mass, when we receive the Eucharist, we have this special sense of peace. I know back when I was in college up at Midview State, unfortunately, and maybe you've fallen in the same way, I missed Mass a couple times. And the reason I remember I missed Mass was because those weeks for me were horrible. It just didn't go well. It seemed like I was missing something. And who I was missing was Jesus. And so ever since then, I've made a commitment. Obviously, entering the seminary helped out, but made a commitment to go to Mass every single weekend. And now when I'm up at Lake of the Woods ice fishing, I still can celebrate Mass with no excuse because, well, I'm a priest and I can do that, which is very good. But I need it for peace. I need it just so my life can continue and I can keep it in balance, that I'm able to receive Jesus. And of course, we know that we cannot put a weight on the Eucharist. We cannot put a weight on the Mass. We do know, as the Catechism states, that the Eucharist, the Mass, is the source and summit of our life. It should be what we attain for the most important thing of the week. But we can't put a weight on it. We can't put a price on it. People have tried, by the way. They've tried to weigh the Mass. Our kids, of course, know this beautiful story. Read it to them on Wednesday, The Weight of a Mass. Remember seeing this book? Did Taylor read it to you? Do you remember? I hope so, unless she lied to me, which would not be a good thing. But I think she did. It's a very beautiful book, The Weight of a Mass, and it's even more beautiful because it's actually based on a true story. Now, in this story, it's the story of a baker and baked goods, and that makes sense. But in real life, it's actually based off of a butcher. But it's really hard to make a children's book based off of a butcher, because those images might be a little gruesome for them. So instead, they did a baker with donuts and wedding cakes. But in real life, the real story that this is based on happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Luxembourg, Europe. Not Iowa, but Luxembourg, Europe. It's a very small country. I've actually been there for a week before, and Luxembourg, even today, is 98% Catholic. Not all of them are practicing, but they've been 98% Catholic. But in this little country of Luxembourg, a captain of the forest guards was in a deep conversation with a butcher when an elderly woman entered the shop. The butcher broke off the conversation to ask the old woman what she wanted. She had come to beg for a little meat, but had no money. The captain was amused at the conversation which ensued between the poor woman and the butcher, and remembered it the rest of his life. The butcher, of course, asked the woman, "Only a little meat, but how much are you going to give me?" "I am sorry," the woman responded. "I have no money at all, but I will hear Mass for you," which means that when she goes to Mass, she will offer up that intention for the butcher. We, by the way, can still do that today. When we come to Mass, we always should offer up a Mass for someone or something, an intention. Both the butcher and the captain, by the way, when they heard that she would offer a Mass for them, hear a Mass for them, were very indifferent about religion. So they at once began to scoff at the old woman's answer. "All right then," said the butcher, "you go and hear Mass for me, and when you come back, I'll give you as much meat as the Mass is worth." They're going to attempt to weigh the Mass. The woman left the shop and returned an hour later, which I think must have been as a very short homily, because they returned an hour later. She approached the counter, and the butcher, seeing her, said, "All right then, now we will see." He took a slip of paper and wrote on it, "I heard a Mass for you." And he placed the paper on the scales and a tiny bone on the other side, but nothing happened. Remember, the scales back then were weighing this way, back and forth, to try to even it out, but nothing happened. Next, he placed a piece of meat instead of the bone, but still the paper proved to be heavier. The paper that simply stated, "I heard a Mass for you." The captain, who had decided to stay on at the shop to see how the small drama would end, looked at the butcher. Both men were beginning to feel ashamed of their mockery of the Mass. The butcher placed a large piece of meat on the balance, but still the paper held its own. The butcher, exasperated, examined the scales, but found they were all right. Placing an extremely large piece of meat on the scale, it still favored the weight of that single piece of paper that stated, "I heard a Mass for you." Removing both items, he again checked the mechanism of the scale and then weighed several other items, and the scale proved to be exactly accurate. Exasperated, the butcher said kindly to the woman, "What do you want, my good woman? Must I give you a whole leg of lamb?" As he placed a leg of lamb on the balance, the paper still outweighed the meat. An even larger piece of meat was put on, but again, the weight remained on the single piece of paper that stated, "I heard a Mass for you." This impressed the butcher so much that he converted immediately and promised to give to the woman whatever she wanted, her daily ration of meat. Of course, townspeople heard of this. Some of the beggars heard about it, and they came to him and asked for meat, and he said, "Yes, I will give it to you." Other people heard this as well, the story goes on to say, and people came to buy even more goods from him because of his honesty, because of his devotion, because of his skill as a butcher. The captain guard, well, he left the shop a changed man and became an ardent lover of daily Mass. Because of this incident, he became a daily attendant at Mass, and his children were trained to follow in his example. Peace and happiness in the home increased as the love of God grew in the family. Did you catch that? Peace grew in the family. Why? Because they're receiving the Eucharist. They're going to Mass. Peace is with them. Jesus was truly present in their family. Two of his sons became priests, one a Jesuit and the other a father of the Sacred Heart. Later, when his sons became priests, the captain advised them to say Mass well every day and never miss the sacrifice of the Mass through any fault of their own. This story was made known public, by the way, because it was given in a homily back in the 1900s. And the priest, when he gave the homily, ended it by saying, "I am the religious of the Sacred Heart, and the captain was my father." Look at this story and what happened. They were present, the captain was present, the butcher was there. This woman offered up a Mass, a simple Mass, not thinking much of it, and yet it outweighed everything. We know that the Mass is priceless. We know that the Mass is a source and summit of our life. In receiving the Eucharist, we are able to attain this peace, we are able to attain this happiness, this love. I believe when Jesus said in John 14:27, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you," what he was speaking about was the Eucharist and how great a gift it is to us. Nothing can outweigh it. Let us not take it only as a symbol. Let us not mock it up, but instead truly have this devotion to God, coming to him week after week, not missing out on any accord, but rather truly seeing the Mass for what it is, the most important thing, the most important event in our life.